It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
All right, America. Good morning. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I am your host. You're joining us in our third segment this morning. And I was originally going to talk about GOP and how Boehner's statement is that they are hell-bent on passing immigration and how that is treason against the nation until they seal the border. And then our fourth segment was going to be the cancer of our national government must be excised. I'm going to push that down. So we'll get to immigration and Boehner in a moment. But I got to finish this article because I got to tell you, folks, if this doesn't express to you how this nation has been misled and the treasonous, and I don't mean by a government official, I mean by the media, who has an obligation and owes it to the American people to properly do their role and play their role of a watchdog and an information source, but not a source of propaganda on behalf of government. If that's all that we can expect out of Reuters, New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the AP, Associated Press, then I got to tell you, folks, they're no different. And I told you about an article, which a show that I did and an article that I posted up on going back about a year and a half or a year ago or so, when Obama and the Congress lifted the Smith-Mundt limitations on the use of propaganda on American citizens. This is in full swing, folks. Don't you smell it? This is like propaganda interleaved with a fact here and a fact there, but always taken out of context, always misaligned, always skewed a little bit. This is the idea. Have you ever seen that Picasso painting where there's a guy whose face is melting and there's a clock melting over the thing and the sky has all this crazies? That's what this is. Instead of a realistic view, you get this skewed kind of, this skewed LSD view of the world. And that's essentially what they are feeding America. It's treasonous because the papers and the media in this nation have been doing this for a long, long time. They owe us better than that. Your job is to not only know and see it when you and know it when you see it, recognize it for what it is, but this is a perfect opportunity for you to take this article, print it out, sit there and comment and mark it up, and then take this to those people who are doubting Thomases in your world, in your circle of influence, and use it as an educational experience. Teach them how to critically recognize it. Even if at the end of the day they disagree with you on the issue of Bundy, the next time they read a story, in the back of their mind is going to be this whole concept that maybe I should question that. Let me pick it up where I left off. I'm going to go back over this paragraph again. Someone who has known Bundy since this is where they start to drag Sheriff Richard Mack into this. Someone who has known Bundy since his early 1990s fallout with the BLM is Richard Mack. First of all, there was no fallout with the BLM. Bundy never was in bed with the BLM, not willingly. He may have been held in there as a hostage by the BLM, and he attempted to use the courts to excise himself, and the courts supported the hostage takers. Someone who has known Bundy since his early 1990s fallout with the BLM is Richard Mack, a former Arizona sheriff who founded the militia group, the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. It's never been known as a militia group. This is a group of individuals who are sitting current and or former members of law enforcement in states and counties around the country. These people are, in order to be a member of the CSPOA, you have to be an active or former police officer. or law enforcement officer, whether that be a county sheriff or a city police department. These people are not militias. They go on to say, Mack is also a prominent member of Oath Keepers, a similar group. So now they're going to point to Oath Keepers as a militia organization as well and tie the two together. A similar group of serving or former soldiers, police, and firefighters who view themselves as defenders of the U.S. Constitution. More than 100 Oath Keepers headed to the desert, said Mack. Okay, first of all, why would they characterize the CSPOA as a militia group, but then characterize Oath Keepers as a similar group serving or former soldiers, police, and firefighters? Why wouldn't they characterize the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association as what it is? Active and former members of law enforcement, not militia. Here's where, boy, if you don't smell, if you cannot feel, this is like the heat off the fire on your face of propaganda. Listen to this. Mack, who proposed putting women on the front line of the standoff with the agents, said armed resistance was a justified response to a, quote, totally unnecessary, end quote, show of force by the BLM. So now they're going to characterize Mack as, first of all, they're stating what he said, and they're incorporating in quotes the totally unnecessary word, but not the rest of what he said. And they inject at the beginning that Mack, who proposed putting women on the front line of the standoff with the agents, and then they quote him here. It was so obvious. It looked like it was going to be another Waco or Ruby Ridge, Mack said, referring to two bloody sieges in the 1990s involving federal agents and armed civilians that fueled the militia movement. Don't you see how prejudicial this is? They're prejudicing those people who are reading this who never heard of Waco or Ruby Ridge. And there's lots of those folks out there. You've heard of it. But, think about the college students out there who don't know really what to think of all this. Think of all the middle-class people who are just so busy running around racing from to and fro in their Audi that they don't even think about stuff like this. But they get a hold of this article, and think of it how they would perceive this. They would trust Reuters as an honest broker. They're anything but. They utilize, first of all, they call this referring to, well, let me read you the quote again so you get it. It was so obvious it looked like it was going to be another Waco or Ruby Ridge, quote, Mack said, referring to two bloody sieges in the 1990s involving federal agents and armed civilians that fueled the militia movement. With all due respect, the militia movement is not fueled by anything other than the outrageous treason of everybody in Washington, D.C. It's fueled, look, if Waco and Ruby Ridge actually fueled militia groups, we would have taken this country back sometime before 2014 for an act of treason that would occur in the mid-90s, wouldn't we? You see, this is the exact example. I'm going to give you another example of how insane this kind of argument is from them. The anti-gunners classify every person who's interested in exercising their Second Amendment as dangerous. Well, with all due respect, we know empirically that most of America does not believe, even if they don't own guns, that guns should be banned. Only if you listen to the liar Obama, who says that 90 million Americans agree with, or 90% of Americans agree with him, which is a bald-faced, flippin' lie. Most Americans say, I don't even own a gun, but I think people ought to be able to own them. So, if you look at it from that perspective, The anti-gunners say everybody who owns a gun is potentially dangerous. Well, with all due respect, if gun owners were that dangerous, we would have wiped out the anti-gunners a long time ago. I can put the same argument here. If Waco and Ruby Ridge were fueling the militia movement, then we would have taken the nation back by force a decade ago. 2 decades ago. How many children were killed at Waco to save them, allegedly, from potential child abuse? Yeah. I'm going to go back into this article. A number of Bundy supporters wore military fatigues and carried rifles and pistols and had traveled from California, Idaho, Arizona, Montana, and beyond. Most kept their handguns holstered. First of all, again, listen to the prejudicial language they use. A number of Bundy supporters wore military fatigues. So cargo pants are now fatigues. Carried rifles and pistols. Most of them kept their handguns holstered. I didn't see a single handgun out. Did you? In all the press coverage I watched, I didn't see a single handgun unholstered. I saw rifles carried, but that's because they don't make a holster for a rifle that you can carry on your body other than a sling. Now they throw this back and they inject Mack into it again. Mack, who wore his gun on his hip, and other Bundy supporters interviewed by Reuters said they would not shoot first, but would retaliate if fired upon. We did not want anything to get out of hand, said Mack. All right. So let's understand what they just said there. Mack, who wore his gun on his hip, they want you to draw a mental image. They are drawing for you an analogy. I draw analogies for you every day. All the time I do it. Why? Because I want you to gather a mental picture of the absurdities that we're talking about. And they're giving you a mental picture of this guy who stands there. And if you've never met or seen or know anything about Richard Mack, you're envisioning him standing there hip shot like Clint Eastwood, just itching for a fight. Desperate, with his fingers twitching to draw and fire. Mack, who wore his gun on his hip. Their next paragraph is game changer. The Weekend Showdown marked the latest resurgence. Resurgence. That means it's been happened before, and now it's back. The Weekend Showdown marked the latest resurgence of violent anti-government sentiments that have existed in rural America for centuries, said Catherine Stock, a history professor at Connecticut College who specializes in rural militias. Really? So, they don't say that's a quote from her because it's not in quotes. So, Reuters paraphrases what Catherine Stock, a history professor at Connecticut College, who allegedly specializes in rural militias. And I don't know how someone in Connecticut can specialize in rural militias because there's nothing rural about Connecticut. Not to mention that Connecticut right now is the land of tyranny for gun ownership in the first place. And I guarantee you Connecticut College is liberal. I'll guarantee it. I haven't done my homework on it, but I'll tell you what, I'll bet you $100. Somebody disprove me, I'll send you $100. The Weekend Showdown marked the latest resurgence of violent, anti-government sentiments that have existed in rural America for centuries. So, well, first of all, that's a misstatement right off the bat, because there hasn't been violent anti-government sentiment in rural America for centuries. There hasn't been any anti-government or violent sentiments for centuries at all in the United States of America. Where is that coming from? Where was the last uprising that Catherine, dear Ms. Stock, can point to? And notice that they couch it as rural America in order to demonize them hillbillies out there making their own whiskey in the backyard. This is written for the BMW set. Get it? In Connecticut. The Audi set. Who have a four-wheel drive but have never actually engaged it. They go on to say, and now they quote her. Now they put her in quotes. So what that tells you, by the way, is the first sentence I just read you was not an actual quote. It was the author's personal opinion and paraphrase from Catherine Stock. Now here's her actual quote. The question is whether we're going to see sustained flame up now. We could see more of that if they actually think that the federal government is going to stand down. So here what she's doing is she's inciting the federal government to stand up and block further actions by those extremist militias out in rural America. The armed and dangerous ones. Get it? It goes on to say, it's not the groups. It's not their concerns. It's not their anger. All of that is old. But the federal government backing down? I was like, wow, seriously? End quote. That is the quote of Ms. Catherine Stock, the history professor at Connecticut College who specializes in rural militias. She sounds like a California girl. It's like, wow, dude, seriously? Seriously? Dudes. It's not the groups. It's not the concern. It's not their concerns. It's not their anger. All of that is old. Well, that ought to tell you something. First of all, if it's not the groups and it's not their concerns, which have been blatantly ignored by a group of statists and elitists in Washington who treat us as if we are there for nothing more than to serve them. We are a commodity to be bought, sold, traded, and occasionally culled if we get out of hand and create a problem for the Washington farmers. It's not their concerns. It's not their anger. All of that is old, she says. But the federal government backing down? I was like, wow, seriously? Dudettes, did you check it out, man? I was like, wow, can you believe it? The federal government is back down. Does that sound like a serious scholar to you? A serious scholar at Connecticut College who specializes in rural militias. We're going to continue. Stock said, now they're paraphrasing her again. They're not quoting her. They're paraphrasing her, which means that they can take what she said and then they can, bend it around a little bit, make it come out like he wants it to sound like he interpreted what she said. Because we don't really know what she said. Get it? Stock said that the rise of right-wing media outlets, now we're going to tie alternative media to the right-wing extremist gun groups, the militias, right? Stock said the rise of right-wing media outlets and websites and the election of Republican politicians who have shifted the party further to the right have given a new legitimacy to groups that were once dismissed as being on the fringe. They just threw every member of the conservative concept, everyone who believes in a constitution, under the bus as being on the fringe. Really? At least a half dozen state legislators from Nevada, Washington, Utah, and Arizona attended protest rallies in Bunkerville at the weekend. At the weekend event. At the barbecue, dudes. Michelle Fiore, a Republican Nevada assemblywoman from Las Vegas, who said she joined the protesters daily after getting a torrent of supportive emails about Bundy from constituents, called the resistance justified. This is historic, she said. This is the first time we went arm to arm with the federal government. So now they're putting Michelle Fiore in there as and there this is, realize something, folks. You ever know how music is written? First there's a verse, and then sometimes a second verse, and then there's a chorus. And then usually in music, there's something called a refrain that's injected in there that, changes the song from the regular beat, ba 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 ba, and then they change it to da 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 da, and then they go back to ba 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 ba. That concept is, so they give you a breath. They let you take a deep breath. They pull your head back out of the bucket of water that they've been holding it under, and they say, go ahead and breathe. Okay, boom, and then they shove you back in. Here it comes. The Bundy dispute has been simmering since 1993, when the BLM took over the management of the land on which his cattle grazed. So there you go. They belied their own statement earlier in the article that said that BLM and Bundy had a falling out. They didn't have a falling out. Bundy never wanted to be part of the BLM family. The Bundy dispute has been simmering since 1993, when the BLM took over the management of the land on which his cattle grazed. The agency ordered him to reduce the number of grazing cattle to protect the habitat of the desert tortoise, which had been listed as threatened. Bundy refused and has not paid grazing fees since then. The BLM says he now owes more than $1 million. This is under the section of government missteps. So this is the refrain, right? Critics of the BLM, which administers 245 million acres of public land in the 12 western states, say it mishandled the situation and was unprepared for the armed resistance, despite fears in past years that the seizure of the illegally grazing cattle could spark violence. So that means they've done it before to other ranchers, but just gotten away with it. BLM spokesman Craig Leff said the, quote, safety of the employees and the public was key. I'm going to run out of time, dagnabbit. Was key throughout the course of the operation. The BLM, the National Park Service, and the U.S. Park Police, quote, had the minimal personnel needed to maintain the safety of the operation. Really? I saw hundreds of police cars streaming in. I saw SWAT vehicles pouring down the road. The minimal personnel. There was a line of probably 50 police cars that raced up there. Multiple SWAT vans and these buses that were brought in that had bars on the windows. They were paddy wagons. I mean, I'm talking about commercial-grade buses like Greyhounds. Two sets of images were frequently cited by those who saw the roundup of Bundy's cattle as a call to arms. The first showed BLM agents using a stun gun to subdue one of Bundy's sons at a small protest on April 9th, bloodying his shirt over his heart, and a female relative of Bundy being knocked to the ground in a tussle with agents. Looking at that made it extremely clear that these federal agents are willing to hurt people and didn't think they would be accountable, said militia leader Sheriff Richard Mack. See, here we go. We're right back to the beat again now. The refrain's over. You've been able to get your breath. We're holding your head back under the water. Photographs of the so-called First Amendment zone, a taped-off patch of desert where agents would allow protests to be held, also prompted outrage. Mack and other militia members say they have yet to pick up their next battle. Quote, we're only reacting to what the government does. We hope that they'll keep it a little calm from now on and not overreact. Folks, you've just been given the Goebbels version from Reuters. We'll be back in just a second.